the, this workshop. Kevin's going to be a little bit late, actually, he just said, so we'll just get going on here. We have Miss Tina here from the Western Alliance for Economic Development to talk to us today about urban renewal as a possible tool for our city so we can get ourselves educated, right?
Correct.
Smartified. So I'll just turn it over to you and just have you, and you got the clicker and stuff.
I
Right?
have the clicker, yes.
All right.
So thank you for letting me come and share knowledge with you today. For those that may be online, and I realize this is in perpetuity because you're going to put the video someplace, that Western Alliance is a nonprofit and the City of Star is a member of the Western Alliance, and part of those services are to help you with economic development and education and services in that respect. So I wanted to, I hope I hit the right button, just kind of talk about, really we're going to focus tonight on what is an urban renewal district. It's actually, the district is the land, the agency is what runs the district. And so I'm just going to go over the things that are to be aware of when you are involved with an urban renewal district. Little disclaimer, I am not an attorney, and I always tell my cities after this presentation that if you choose to go down this road, this is a road that you need to work with an attorney who is familiar with creating these districts. My slides are based off of slides that an attorney gave to me to use for presentations with my cities. So any errors are mine and not the attorneys. I will say also that there is legislation currently happening, so we always check after the legislative session to see whether or not our legislators have changed policy. So tonight we're going to talk briefly on, well, we're going to go in depth on urban renewal agencies, briefly on open meeting law, public records law, ethics that are involved with a urban renewal agency. And then one of the things that an agency also deals with is procurement. So for just some statute references in case you choose to look it up, there are several statutes that are pertaining to the creation of an urban renewal agency. The first statute gives you some of the reasons why: to remove blight, decay, to do redevelopment of an old part of town, to do new development, and to encourage private enterprise. And then part of the authorities that statutory authorities that urban renewal agency has the ability to bond. They have the same fiscal year. They still have to report their budget, that same kind of transparency, and you have to file your plan with the state. I do want to point out that if any urban renewal dollars are utilized in public buildings, i.e. as a library, you must have a not a super majority, but a 60% passage that has to go to the voters.
So, okay, so when that, on that bond, right? So on that bonding, is the voters the entire city, or is it just those within that urban renewal area?
It would be, so in this particular case, it would be that portion that is in, if the land was all inside of city limits, it would be the city it would be the city residents that would vote for a public building. If you're not doing a library or a police station, then you would be able to, if it's, as long as it's in your plan, and we'll talk about the plan in a little bit. It's just when the city of Nampa built a library, there was a little bit of pushback and the legislature changed it. They didn't feel that was proper usage for funds. And we'll talk about what are some good things that could be used for.
And when we say supermajority, it's 66 and 2/3, right?
In this particular case, it's not a supermajority, but they are saying 60%.
Oh, 60%.
So
Okay.
you don't have to do the 67% like a school bond, but you do have to do a 60%.
Okay.
And yeah, we'll talk a little bit.
Quick question. So you mentioned that if it's all within the city limits, so can the city do an urban renewal district that's within its area of impact, but not necessarily in the city limits?
We're going to talk about that a
Okay.
little bit later.
Thank you.
Okay. So the way it's funded is another statute, Title 50, Chapter 29. One of the things to understand, and we'll go in a little more depth as to how it's funded, but the Urban Renewal Agency does not decide how high the taxes are, nor how much of the tax money comes to them. That's all set out in statute. So the assessed value of the buildings or the assessed value of the land to start comes from the county assessor. And then statute determines what goes to an agency. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So here's a good slide that shows you how the revenues flow. So the taxpayers that are within the urban renewal district they're the ones that pay the taxes, the property taxes. So I gave you an example here so you have an understanding, and I've used old dates because it's an ever-changing world, right? So if you have an assessed value of $100,000 and say the tax apportionment is $1,000 when you start and create the district. So what happens then is you create the district and development happens, and then that parcel of land is then, say in 3 years, valued at $150,000. What happens is you get the taxing entities that had the $1,000, they still get their $1,000 that they got back when it was created. It's the new tax roll monies that then go over to the Urban Renewal Agency. So it becomes so you're not, the money that they were getting before the Urban Renewal District was created still goes to the fire department, to the school district, to the cemetery, to the city. All of those monies still go to the taxing agencies at the beginning of the creation of the district. It's just the new values that come through, and there are some exceptions. I believe now currently the new values, the school districts still get their full taxing share. Their monies do not go to the Urban Renewal Agency. And I know there was some discussion for fire districts, but I don't think that's happened yet. So I think that's just a conversation to, we can talk about that in a minute because there are ways to mitigate that concern. I'll show you that. So anyway, a flow chart so that you can understand where the revenue is coming, how it flows through. There is a process that any organization, any city should go through is to do an eligibility study. Do you have land that is qualified under the statute? It's blight, decay, redevelopment, or new development. You need to have a study to see where's the best place. And so that's what it is you're going to do a study to see what's eligible. And then the city council is the one who authorizes the agency. And I have a slide a little further on that talks about who's on that board. We'll get to that in a minute. So the city council has to authorize the Urban Renewal Agency, and they then prepare a plan. And this plan, they take the plan and the feasibility study, and then they would recommend approval to the city council. Now, I've put in gray this plan review because a lot of these processes have been set up where there's a separate planning and zoning commission, and STAR does not have a separate commission, right? And so I think we would need to double check with the attorney to make sure that we have the proper review process to make sure that the plan goes through the proper approving, because we're not going to go through a planning and zoning. Normally, so the city council authorizes the group to work on it with the feasibility study. and to create the plan. And then they would bring the plan to planning and zoning, and they would evaluate it, and then it would come to city council for approval. And then you're not totally functioning until you adopt a city council. You have to adopt an ordinance and it takes a public hearing in order to implement the plan and start the district. So there's some elements that you need to put into the plan. The plan is very critical because if it's not in the plan, you can't spend urban renewal dollars on it. And so what you do is you look at the area that's covered and take into account what are some of the things that those urban renewal dollars could be working towards. And here's just kind of a list of some things. You know, you can demo old buildings, you could rehab aged buildings, environmental remediation, art, open spaces, streets, sidewalks, utilities, parking, encourage private development. And this in the plan is where you would meet with your stakeholders. STAR is a little unique in that you're not your own streets and you're not your own water and sewer, but there's nothing that says that you can't collaborate with those other stakeholders and create a plan that what your goal should be is how do you completely develop that area that's in the urban renewal district. And it takes more than just what maybe the city covers, but it's that all encompassing. So it's water, sewer, fire, electricity, all of those things. And
So essentially, so like on the roadside, right? We can collect the money if we believe the roads need to be widened or whatever in this area, and then the funds, we would turn them over to ACHD to take care of that? Is that how that would work?
I don't know if you would turn it over them to take care of it, but it might be something, a bill for services.
Okay.
It would require probably a memorandum of understanding. And I'm going to say that's a lawyer question. And I'll go back to, I'm not the lawyer. I think that there is a way to take in the needs of all of the service providers. And as you create that plan and it meets the thresholds, then it's what agreement you have. Do you make an agreement with ITD or ACHD? We're going to give you X number of dollars. Maybe it becomes a match to theirs, right? To complete projects. I know that in CUNA, in their urban renewal district, they were looking at how to do roads and stuff, even outside of what ITD does. So I think there's possibilities there.
Tina?
Yeah.
How much specificity needs to be involved in all these different elements? For instance, you've got some relatively generic things here, and I'm assuming we need a little more detail than that. But
Yeah.
How much do we need?
So you would possibly name the street from this intersection to this intersection. When you define your district, you're going to define a boundary. And just as you have defined a boundary for that south of the river presentation that you're considering. So there's a defined boundary as to what the district is. And then you take elements of it within that district. A part of our plan is to build roads that are this wide with curbs, sidewalks, and gutters. But you define it that it has to be within the urban renewal district. And we're going to talk a little bit about Caldwell's and a little further, but their urban renewal district is actually, it's one district, but it's located in two places, Sky Ranch and Indian Creek Plaza. So it's just one urban renewal agency and one urban renewal district, but their land is not all contiguous. So there is that possibility too.
And then as time goes on, can the elements of the plan evolve over the life of the district, and can the boundaries be changed?
Not necessarily, no. When you set up the boundaries, it would be almost the same formal process when you created the district to begin with. And it's difficult to amend the plan. And that's why you need to make sure you have your plan in place. There are, and again, I'm going to say the lawyer, if you, and I don't know your city attorney enough to know their experience, but I would definitely recommend that you work with an attorney who, and there's a handful of them in the valley that have set up a lot of these, right? And so they're the ones that can say yes or no. But I do know that it's very difficult. I don't think you can make the area larger without going in and almost redoing the whole process. And it has to have a sunset. I think you can go up to, it used to be 20 years, but I think it's 15 years now.
And what about the elements in the plan? So for instance, if we were working on, streets and sidewalks, then we decided that because of the way something else developed, that we needed to alter the route or add a street, can we change those elements, or is that
Yes.
start over things? Well?
Yeah. With Sky Ranch, they ended up moving roads and utilities. They moved a irrigation ditch, so there are things that in the initial plan that they thought that they would do, but it was still about roads and the irrigation ditch, and it was still within the confines of the district. In fact, they built the road in one spot, had somebody come in and want a parcel of land, and ended up moving the road that they built so that the business that was coming in could have more land without.
I have a question on that. If we're moving roads and things of that nature, does this plan have to be bought off by outside agencies such as ACHD or ITD?
I think that it would be wise for you to consult when you're going through the plan with your other stakeholders, your other service providers. But this is the Urban Renewals Agency. It's their plan. And it depends if you want cooperation with the others. So there are some, it might be a good thing. So these plans are all filed for every urban renewal district. Plans are filed at the state level. And go read a couple, go online and read some of them and see what they're saying. I mean, I can speak, I've got a couple of slides towards the end of the presentation. I can tell you specifically some things. I met with Steve Foltz yesterday, who's kind of shepherded the Sky Ranch Caldwell Urban Renewal District. So we can go into depth on that.
So when you're talking about the sunset of 15 years, let's say you're 10 years into it and you think you're done. Can you end the urban renewal early, or is it automatically go the full 15 years?
I believe you can end it if everything's been accomplished. Okay. Part of the conversation should be about, I lost my train of thought. I'll think about it in a minute. When it comes to the monies, right, if you've accomplished all of your tasks in the plan, then there isn't any reason not to end the district unless you foresee more development happening in the area. The Post Falls is a district that is the Riverbend Urban Renewal. I have a flat slide in here to show you it's successfully closed, and you'll be kind of amazed at some of those numbers. So I want to tell you that the Urban Renewal Board, the governing board is also subject to the open meeting law, transparency. All of the things that the city council needs to go through would be the same thing that the agency would go through. The UR still have to notice meetings. You still have procedures, you still have to approve and post agendas. Same things, meeting place needs to be ADA accessible. It can be done telephonically or over the internet, as we are doing this meeting tonight. Subject to public records law, so you have to keep minutes to your meetings. Public has a right to request information. It's a little different in, you can label some things exempt. And the next slide, I'll talk about that.
So are the custodian of those records our city clerk then for this district? Or is it its own entity that takes care of all the public records requests?
It's its own entity.
Okay.
They are their own entity, and we're going to talk about how you create that board. There are some people get into trouble because they say, well, why do you need that? And you can't ask for that when somebody has a public records request. That's against the law. You can ask them questions to clarify what kind of information. You can charge them just like City Hall for what they need. Public records are exempt. So part of it is the financial, like if you had a sales contract, you were selling a piece of the property that was going through the urban renewal district. The terms of that sale and the negotiation of that sale could be done in executive session and information be redacted. And so contracts, when you're discussing purchase of property or sales of property, it's important to know that in cost estimates before you bid a project out, all of those are considered matters of commerce, and they are handled in an executive session, duly noticed and moving into by the agency board. There are some misconceptions. You know, the urban renewal districts have evolved over time. I think they were actually started back in like 1965. And it's one of the few things that a city, one of the few tools that a city has. As you know, in our state, there's no such thing as a local option sales tax, and everything's pretty much divvied up and entailed according to statute. And so this is a tool, urban renewal districts is a tool that is used by cities to help do major developments. And so I'm going to say the public has a perception of, oh my gosh, our taxes are going up, but it's not their taxes that are going up. It's just the pieces of property by value, the assessed value is where that raise comes in tax revenue. And our legislature, I'm not going to say that they all know the ins and outs of an urban renewal district and the agency and how it runs. They each have their own specialties. And so sometimes there are misconceptions that happen with our policymakers. And so part of the process of creating the district is to be transparent in all things that that board does and that the city council does on its way to that spot. To create the Urban Renewal Agency Board, it can be anywhere from 3 to 9 people. It cannot, they say that you can appoint city council members to be on the board, but they can't hold majority position in chairs. And a board member, a commissioner on the Urban Renewal Agency can be removed for misconduct or a lack of participation, just like a council member could.
Is that removal by the mayor, or how's that removed?
It's removed by the board.
By the board, okay.
Yeah, so it's one of those kind of things where the mayor, in consultation with council, appoints this agency board. And when you set up the plan, you say, we're going to have 5 to 9 commissioners, right? Maybe when you first start, you don't need 9 people, right? Maybe the project isn't that big and maybe it's just 5. You want to make sure that you have the right expertise on that board, that it's somebody who understands financial or construction, needs to be part of the makeup, but you don't want to have it everybody construction or everybody financial, right? You need to have that blend of people to be there for that.
I have a quick question. It says 3 to 9. Is that some sort of statute or is that just recommendations?
I think it's in the statute. I brought a copy of the statute that I'll leave so that you have it to look at.
Is it odd number or can it be even number?
I think it's how you set it up. You actually come up with bylaws and you have a formal committee. So it's how you set it up. And it's not, it does operate independently of the city. So you may appoint somebody, but you as in the city, but you don't, and you cannot sit on the board and influence what that agency board does. It's kind of a separation of duties.
Shouldn't that hold true for city council as well?
You can have, you can have city council members on the agency board, but you can't have a majority of council. So if you have a 5-person board, you can't have 3 city council members on it, right? If you have a 9-person, you could have 3, right? But keeping in mind, then you'd have to post everything so that they would know you weren't doing city business. And you need to
have
make sure. On. I'm going to say yes. So Middleton has an existing urban renewal district and they do have a city council liaison. And so the council member sits on the board. She's actually their treasurer, but she's also a city council member. So again, it just depends. She's the only city council member on there though. The rest of the board are other members of the community.
So I have a question on your previous slide. On the can be removed for inefficiency, neglect, or misconduct. Does it fall under the rules of an appointed position?
It's set out in the statute, Kevin. It's the same, I think, and if I remember correctly, like when I sat on a school board, if you missed 3 consecutive meetings without a valid excuse, you could be removed from the board. So it's that type of it. It's set in statute how to remove.
Okay, so I think you said that it's the same as a council member, but that's really different.
I think that, yeah, possibly I shouldn't have, you missed my disclaimer. I'm not an attorney, so I'm just,
Well,
went on TV.
attorney
Yeah.
or not attorney, I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that.
yeah. I'm going to tell you that the laws are clear regarding setting up and the mechanics of the board and what they can function on. And in the very beginning, you'll notice I gave you the statutes that talk about powers and duties. And so you'll be able to refer to those directly if you want to. And it always fails when we're going to have a section here on ethics. It's definitely in your best interest that if you ever have a question, then you ask your attorney, and we'll get into that further on down.
So Tina, I have a question too. So would this board be put together prior to, at the very beginning of the process, or is it after like council's approved, that we want to move on with the district?
So if you go back to the process slide, you can commission a consultant to do the study, or you can have staff do the study. It's, however the city wants to do it. And then by resolution, you have to authorize the agency to prepare a plan. And then at that point in time, you could appoint the board at that time. And then that urban renewal plan and feasibility study comes back to approval to the city council. And so even though you have this separate board, there's still oversight on what's in that plan and where those dollars go. And I will tell you that annually, the urban renewal district has to file an audit to the city. And so that the city knows that the funds are being used according to the plan. So there is, financial oversight on that.
So that board then would be any of the projects or anything, that board's responsible for securing the contracts, putting it out the bid, doing all that kind of stuff. I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, we're going to talk about what are the responsibilities and the powers right now. So the board, there's a plan for the district, and that it's the board's responsibility to see that all activities comply with that plan. It's the board's responsibility for the budget. They handle the acquisition and disposition of property. They can issue bonds without a vote. And again, as I spoke earlier about the municipal building exception, if you're going to build a police station or a community hall, something that's considered a public municipal building, you do need a vote of the citizens in the city.
Okay, so let me ask you about the issue of the bonds without a vote. So the bonds then, is that an additional tax that will be put on that boundary? Or is it paid with the funds that are accumulated through those extra, whatever you call those, SURA?
Tax increment fund.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
tax increment funds.
The bond is paid for by the tax revenues.
That you're
It's
collecting.
that
So
you're
it's-
collecting. It's a payment. You have to be able to make that payment out of budget that payment.
Okay.
And so it's not like, here's the assessed dollars and the, $1,000 is going to everybody, 500 to the agency, and then you add a bond payment on top of it.
Right.
That's not the
That's not
case.
what happens.
No.
Okay, all right.
No. It's the agency, the board's responsibility for any of, it's like running a business. You run it like a business, right? So maybe you have larger projects that you're going to put money in the bank and save to accomplish so that you don't have to do a bond. Or maybe you run the district for 3 or 4 years on the buildup so that you have a little cash reserve to start doing the things that are in the plan. And your bylaws are going to give some of your operating, how many members on the board are you going to have officers? A council, a commissioner, a chairman, or and a vice chair and a treasurer. All of that is set out in the bylaws and filed appropriately. But it is the agency's responsibility, this agency board, to do the contracts and the negotiations. It's not, city's not involved in any of that. It's all on the shoulders. That's why it becomes important as to who you install on that board.
So in reality, even if you created this agency, it's going to be a year before you realize any funds.
Yes. So it's not like you're going to go right in and spend money, right? Development doesn't happen overnight. If I've given you that impression, then I'm wrong. And development is a long game. That's why they give you 15 years, right? And so when you look at, we're going to talk about, what's been accomplished over, we're going to get to them pretty quickly, the slides about Caldwell. I'm going to tell you, Caldwell's getting ready to close out. They've been there 20 years. They have 60 businesses in the Sky Ranch. And I asked Steve to get me some numbers, but they get a little cagey, on how many, but hundreds of jobs. And I have some numbers in here from 2017 before they were closed out.
How much of the overhead and operations of the URA does the city bear? So does this need to be independently financed and, payroll and?
I'm going to tell you, generally speaking, you don't get paid to be on the Urban Renewal Agency Board.
No, certainly you're going to have clerks and accounting and expenses and things like that.
I believe
And an
that,
attorney,
it's up to the Urban Renewal Board to set a budget that they could budget in reimbursing city for costs. I know.
I apologize. So does that mean that the cities do bear those costs?
Kevin, I don't know if you can say that they bear the costs, because when the district is up and running, they're going to pay for them. So whether they pay the city to do it or whether they hire somebody, Eagle hired an administrator who takes care of that because the money's in there. So it's not like it's separate. Oh, the city's going to do all of this and we're not going to reimburse them.
No, I apologize.
Yeah.
I'm struggling maybe to ask the question that you
Okay.
can understand. So what I'm trying to figure out is or maybe I should phrase it this way. What is commonly done to finance the overhead activities of the URA?
I think, especially at the beginning, right?
I believe at the beginning, it's a volunteer board. And you're not handling money until the first property tax revenues come in that show an increase. And in the beginning, it's only going to be that portion of the increase. I know that Eagle hired a part-time administrator who they took money out of the urban renewal district. It would be up to the city whether they wanted to provide those services or whether the agency board decided how they were going to handle that. That's part of how you set up the board and what you want to do. It's not a responsibility of the city to bear the burden of that, but that first
But
year.
initially you have to, because you have to pay for the attorney and all that stuff that goes on before they collect funds, right?
And
So
look-
will that money come back to the city then?
Yeah, and just so you know, I'm not
Yeah,
concerned,
no,
even if it is
yeah.
the city, so.
Yeah.
Let's not worry about
Okay,
that.
okay,
I'm not
okay.
Concerned about that.
Yeah,
But the URA is going to have expenses up front.
Yeah.
Your attorney is not going to be a volunteer position.
no,
I mean, maybe if you get lucky, but, right, we're not gonna get lucky that way. So, your accountant is not going to be a volunteer position. There are certain things, you know, the clerk's got to be there to take minutes, and those minutes have to be stored somewhere. So you've got some
so
overhead.
the minutes to the meetings, the board has their own secretary who takes the minutes, not the city clerk.
I understand that part. What I'm
Okay.
trying to figure out, or trying to, I guess, see if you can help us understand, is where does that financing generally come from up front? Because I understand that the URA doesn't have money coming in at first, but they do have expenses. So what's generally done to bankroll that up front?
The startup money.
So if we go back to the process of setting it up, it is the city that creates,
Okay, thank you.
right? So when you look at the process, all of that beginning part happens up until you approve the plan, until you do the last step, the city council ordinance, after a public hearing that you approve the plan, that's the actual creation. So everything up to that point would be on the backs of the city.
So with the city, can they be reimbursed by any of those funds in the future from stuff that happened in the past?
You're gonna have to ask your lawyer that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, will you do me a favor? Go up there and speak on that so people outside can hear you. And you might need to turn it on. It might be off.
Push. So the district can be open for 15 years before it has to be renewed by the board. I'm assuming that that's what you're,
No, so when you put your plan in place, you say, we believe it's gonna take 10 years to accomplish this, or 15 years, and I don't know if it's a maximum of 15 or 20. It sunsets and it's done. So whether you've accomplished it or not accomplished it,
so then it would be up to the board to, if they're like, hey, we mixed 5 benchmarks and we really want to do that again, to turn around and redo the process
And
over,
restart it,
restart it.
redo it again. Yeah.
so if you have developed the district fully, you have no more land. That means you have to create a new district in a new spot with a new board.
So next part of that question is the bond only allowable for those 15 years?
Yes,
So we're gonna borrow $3 million to turn around and put in a new park, but we have to pay it off in those first 15 years. So we're kind of gambling that that development is going to pay for. So then who
this
puts in
is where you
afterwards?
would save your money if it's a park. You're gonna bond possibly for water, sewer, roads,
Okay,
and electrical, so that you can get business in there.
okay.
And you hold your park off to the side and you save your money and you pay cash for that. You don't necessarily want to bond right off the bat for those types of things.
But if we did do a bond and, Star said, hey, we're gonna drill a well and provide drinking water to this place, we have to pay off that bond before the end of the.
So before you can do the bond, you have to have some type of revenue. And I'm going to say that there is sometimes there's a negotiation of and this is getting into the financial, and I'm going to tell you, double check everything I'm saying with the attorney, right? So my understanding is that it's been my understanding in other districts that they've been able to get land under contract. So they know the businesses are coming in, then they can go and bond for the road because they've sold the pieces and the developers are coming and they have contracts, right? And so they have those agreements in place and they know what revenue is going to come, and then that's at the point. You don't just go out and automatically do all of these things. Sky Ranch was in place for 10 years, almost 12, before they built the Indian Creek Plaza. They didn't do any bonds for the plaza. It's all cash. So, I mean, it depends on how you want to structure it. It becomes part of the budget. So we're going to put these pieces of property are under contract. It becomes part of the question of, who owns the land, and if you don't own the land, then there's a different set of guidelines on where the money is, because you're not selling it, right? Another landowner is. But if you have, it becomes about memorandums of understandings and agreements and contracts that you collect so that you know what that revenue anticipation. So Middleton's Urban Renewal District put in what they did is Ridley's, when it went into Middleton, they put in the stoplight. And then as the Urban Renewal District collected funds, they repaid Ridley's a portion of what they spent on that stoplight. So the stoplight was in the plan, and Ridley's was under contract. They bought it, but they knew they needed the light. And so it became how many years was Ridley's there? A year or more before the stoplight went in. And then as the Middleton's district is just getting ready to sunset, it's either this year or next year, they're pretty much done. But it was Urban Renewal dollars that paid Ridley's back and they had an agreement with Ridley's. And I don't know all the details, but it's my understanding that depending on the continued growth in their area, they got up to a certain amount, went back to Ridley's, but I don't think Ridley's got 100% reimbursement for it because it was part of their impact development. In Eagle, and we talked about administration, again, back to Middleton. My fiscal agent is Greenleaf and the treasurer there is Carrie Huggins, and she is a city council member for Middleton. She sits on the Urban Renewal District and she's their treasurer. And so I've had some conversations with her about how Middleton runs. I have a colleague, Robin. They only hired somebody like 1/3 to half time in Eagle for the Urban Renewal District until they got enough parcels under contract and enough projects going that the board could afford to pay for a full-time administrator. Because initially Robin was half-time economic development and half-time urban renewal administrator. And then as both things were heating up in Eagle, she then moved over to doing full-time economic development, and they've hired a full-time administrator. So sometimes it might be about sharing duties, but ultimately the costs are borne by the board. Let me get back up. Good questions. Ethics in government. This is just the legalese, the statute.
Sorry, can we go back a couple of slides?
Sure.
I wanted to
Which one?
ask you about the next one. Oh, yeah, that one right there.
Okay.
Issue bonds without vote. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd feel more comfortable if I was reading it to you though. It's part of the powers that are set out in the statute, and
So I'll tell you the root of that question.
Okay.
Or one, I guess I'll ask the rest of the council too. Does that seem like taxation without representation to any of the rest of y'all?
So this is where I asked for the question on this, where does the bond, is it a separate tax from the urban renewal money that's coming in? And it's not. It's the bond, it's a bond being paid for with that tax money coming already from the urban renewal. So it's not additional.
So it's not issuing a bond.
It's issuing a bond, but paying the bond back with monies that are already collected from that portion of urban renewal that's paying for
The
it.
bond payments have to come out of the revenue collected through the tax dollars, but it is not, when you look at your tax bill, there'd be a school has and then the bond is separate. It's not, there's no separate bond on the district. They issue a bond and the district makes the payments. It's the payments not coming out of I don't, I'm not sure I'm explaining it correctly, but, or clearly I should say, because yeah.
So it's not a bond.
It's a bond, but not in the sense that you're looking.
It's not a general obligation bond as set out in statute.
This is all the revenue comes into the district. The bond is a little part of it within this district, and it's all handled internally. So there's nothing. I don't know, does that help?
There are different kinds of bonds, Kevin.
It's just,
I understand.
Yeah.
It's basically a mechanism to allow you to accelerate a project you may have.
So there's already a pool of funds,
There's a
and
pool of
this
funds
is
and-
allocating a
Yes.
portion of that.
Yeah.
Specific use.
Yes. So it's not a bond. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. I think it's
There's an overall bond. I get that part, but you can't call that allocation.
I mean, you go get the money on the bond market.
So Kevin, banks
loan.
borrow, it is a loan and it's a terminology. And it truly is something that if the city decides to go down this way, that's a good question for you to ask the attorney. So, because I don't claim to be an expert. I
Can I
just,
just ask one question next? It really is confusing me, and I'm gonna be honest. So it issues a not bond from a bond that's already been passed. So-
Exactly.
So this not bond is coming off a bond that we had to send out to a vote? Or is it coming from other resources that we allocate from
Okay.
the budget?
lose the word bond.
Okay, so hang
Okay,
on.
this tax,
The only time that there is a vote is if it's used on a public entity building. Did you hear that, David?
Yeah.
It's all,
So,
How about call it a lease purchase?
It would be like the agency board going to a bank and getting a loan. And they have called it a bond. Banks issue bonds to raise funds. So if you were doing a sewer project, the city puts in an application, or the sewer district, you put in an application to, you have interim financing, and you have, worked with City of Notice on this, right? They did pass a bond. They went to the voters, they passed a bond to do their sewer upgrade. And the entire system, sewer system, had to vote on that bond. So when it came time for construction, they did interim financing with Zion's Bank. And Zion's Bank had a finite time for, they knew how long the financing was going to go. The bank issued bonds in order to give the money to Notice so they could do the sewer upgrade. At the end of construction, so construction in their case took a little bit longer than normal. It took several years. So when the construction was near complete, then USDA Rural Development came in and they paid off the bond, but it was just a 3-year bond, right? So depends on how much money you're borrowing, but it was a matter of they knew they had grant and loan from USDA Rural Development that would cover the financing costs for that bond. So that's how a sewer project works. I've never been involved in a situation for bonds for roads. And you don't handle water and sewer utilities. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with their financing and how they work things working with cities, but that's how bonds work for that interim financing during construction before they go into a final part. So,
Well, I think it's really important, especially for the public that we use terminology that they can understand, because how a bank raises capital is really irrelevant to the URA, in my opinion. So if the bank wants to issue a bond to raise the capital, or if they've already got the capital in cash sitting somewhere, really doesn't matter. But if we are going to say that we're going to get this unelected board appointed by the mayor and give them the power to issue bonds, that's a really troubling statement for most people. And so that's why I'm bringing it up here. And I think we've got to have our terminology very clear so that it's actually what's taking place.
Kevin, this slide came from an attorney for me to use in the presentation, and that's the words he used. So I'm going to say you're going to have to ask the attorney.
That's a
I'm
perfectly
just,
fine
yeah,
answer.
yeah. Yeah.
Main
So-
concern is making a tax on people.
And
That's
and
what-
know that the revenue comes just from the district. You're not going to make your urban renewal district your entire city. It's not the way it works. You pick a section. And so it's the additional tax revenue that comes from that parcel of land creates a savings account. And the urban renewal agency can issue bonds, borrow bonds. You're going to have to ask the attorney on that one, but they're paid out of the savings account that the urban renewal district has. And it's not like it's a separate tax on top of everything else, because you as a landowner in there, you're not going to see anything different in your tax bill, whether there was an urban renewal district there or not. The county assessor is going to assess your property, whether there's an urban renewal district or not, right? And the urban renewal district doesn't have any control of what the assessment is or what the tax, the city sets a levy for, their taxes. Every taxing district sets a levy. But it's that difference between that $1,000 base and everything that comes in the next 15 years that's over that goes into the savings account for the district to use for improvements, only according to the plan. So, and if through the feasibility study and setting the plan up, that the board or the council, you're going to be approving the creation of this board, I will tell you that their authorities are set out in statute and they're audited just like a city. So, yeah. Okay.
So what do the people that live inside this urban renewal district, what's like voice do they have? Would that be involved like in the plan? So, you would invite them to, participate in that, and so that they would help, with that long-term vision?
Well, let's go back to how you create it. When you go back to what it is that the elements of the plan, it's about land that's vacant or in bad repair or open for development, right? It's not about a subdivision that you're going to take in a subdivision and put them in part of an agency in part of the district, right? So the landowners, you have to have buy-in from them to be a part of it. And maybe they do an owners association, or a couple of them are appointed to the board. I think that just depends. You have to have buy-in from your community. And part of it is that public process. You have hearings and education.
And the benefit of it would be that that extra, I mean, it's not additional tax, but a certain percentage would be specifically, it would stay within that area. And
Yeah.
to, you know,
So Tina, can I try and paint a picture here?
Yeah, I was trying to see my slides. Sorry. I'm missing the one that shows the TIF. So,
So right now, the city of Star is going through a south of the river plan,
mhm,
and it has a specific boundary.
mhm.
And if we were to, for instance, create an urban renewal district that had that exact same boundary, we could take the elements that come out of that plan, because that plan is going to have some elements. It's going to have some things, some open space.
Street lights,
Area.
sidewalks.
It's going to have all those things, maybe some bridges over the river. And we could take those items that are in that plan that we're developing with public input from across the region. And those could be the very same elements that we put into the plan for this urban renewal district.
Absolutely.
And so in a sense, that urban renewal, the mechanism that we use to fund the implementation of this plan that we're going to all this trouble to create.
Correct.
Or we could use something else,
Or potentially a different tool, but this
like
is
a local improvement district.
this
or
would be,
business
this would be a
improvement
tool. So,
You know, it's, you can do a local improvement district, you know, an LID or a CID or a BID. Those all require buy-in from the landowners, obviously, right? Any process. It's about, you know, in Idaho, development pays for itself, right? That's been our mantra, right? If a developer comes in, it's up to them to put in the streets, and then they turn them over to the ACHD. It's up to them to put in the sewer lines, and then they turn them over to the water district, right? I mean, it's up to the developer to make all of those improvements in the infrastructure. The theory behind the Urban Renewal Agency is that if you have bare land, sometimes it's hard to convince somebody to come in and do that development. If it needs to be redeveloped or it's blighted or they'd have to do some demolition, this becomes a mechanism to take a little bit of that burden off to make the property attractive to a developer to come in and increase your property values, increase the value of that specific piece of property. And it's not necessarily, you could bring in an undeveloped land that would eventually go into a subdivision, but that's not what you want to focus on, is to make it to go where a subdivision is going in. What you really want to focus on is your commercial, maybe light industrial, mixed use that provides the city with a higher tax base and evens out your ratio of who are your taxpayers. That's another conversation though. Ethics. I'm not going to read this. This is just by law. You know what you can and cannot do. There was one thing that it talked about personal interests and conflicts of interest and how they are handled. And I put them in there because this becomes a public document. And then, but basically it comes down to, if you screw up, acknowledge it. The board needs to acknowledge anytime there's you have to disclose, you can request to be excused from the conversation. A member of the board can request a legal opinion. Sometimes people inherit property and maybe one of them, so there's different situations and scenarios. I had a couple. Hang on. Yeah, just some situations. I kind of chuckled at what this is. So Commissioner Gitterdun really wanted to approve an upcoming facade improvement application for the building next to his downtown. He calls all of his fellow commissioners one by one to discuss the project, encourage them to support the application, and ask them how they're going to vote. That's a no-no. During the meeting, Commissioner Flip is asking questions that seem to indicate he may not support the application. Commissioner Gitter Dunn sends him several text messages during the meeting explaining why he needs to stay on board and be supportive. Okay, that's obviously a conflict of interest, you know, and that's something that becomes part of why you're careful as to who is appointed to the board. But yeah, so that's just part of I just thought that was a cute story that the attorney put in there. The agency board still has to follow state guidelines for procurement. And the same exemptions that you as a city go through. So I want to talk about Caldwell's Urban Renewal District. So they have 60 companies in the business center and $40 million of investment in 14 new buildings. And in 2017, it was 400 plus jobs. And in conversation with Steve, they're actually closer. Out of the 60 companies this year, they're sitting at about 2,000 new jobs. And the profits from the revenue coming in, I won't call it a profits, but the revenue into the agency fund is what has paid for the Indian Creek Plaza. Now, it's more than that. Back in the 50s, when they developed downtown Caldwell, they tiled and built over the Indian Creek. And at one point in time, it was all cement and asphalt. And so they took those urban renewal dollars and opened up the creek to make it a gathering place. We tore down the old hotel right there on 10th and Blaine, and opened up all the way up to Treasure Valley Community College. Put in nice walking paths, and then they took monies and created a concept and went for the Indian Creek Plaza. But all of that came out of the savings account of the Urban Renewal Agency, and they issued bonds for roads and water and sewer, because that's all part of city, and we're able to pay that without doing any additional taxes. It's all the revenue. There was no special tax bond to create all of that. I was really interested in this Post Falls. So this urban renewal district closed. It was created in 1997, and they went after 330 acres west of Post Falls. And they had a 15-year term limit. So they started out with a base assessed value of $3.7 million, and agency funded infrastructure improvements of $3.8 million. So currently the total assessed value of that is $49,372,000. That's the addition to the tax roll, the increase between the $3 million up to the $49 million in assessed value. They, in that time frame, we created approximately 1,200 new jobs and an average payroll of $19.98 an hour. And then the annual total payroll of $51 million, which is another economic impact to your community. And at the end of 15 years, the district closed and they accomplished what they were trying to do. So that's just kind of one of the, I guess, a success story. In that is where Buck Knives is, where the Cabela's. And so they were able to do that development on the western side of town up to the state line and put in all of the roads and the water and sewer and street lights in that whole development, and there it's still growing.
So I want to ask a question real quick on this. I'm going to go back to that first slide where you had $1,000 as your base and the $500 is the, what do you call it, the SUPA or something like that, right?
Well, I just Star Urban Renewal Agency.
So that $500 tax increase base, right? When it sunsets, how does does that fall back onto the tax? I'm trying to word this. I know on the tax rolls, or does it come into us like if we were not able to take the new construction or whatever for that area, would it all fall back in?
So if you look at
Would
the,
it increase our levy dollar amount, I guess?
well, and that's what the
That's what's happening
legislators,
right now, what we're
that's
talking
what they're
about.
trying to do, but they're not being very successful. But under the current law, when that urban renewal district sunsets, that $500 goes to the taxing entities as split amongst by the levy, right? It doesn't impact what your levies are. It just means because the levies,
So it's just gonna reduce other people's taxes basically, because you're throwing more dollars into it. It's not adding to our tax dollar levy. If my levy amount is 1.5 million, right? And I have this $500 when this expires, it's not gonna make it 1.55 million. It's just gonna go into the total tax rolls and just spread that out,
yeah.
make it cheaper for everybody else to pay that 1.5, right?
So if you, so your tax levy is based on the property value in your city. And that property value continues to rise on the assessed value, and the taxes are still taxed on on that levy, right?
Right.
So what the legislature wants to do is they're saying, well, when the urban renewal district sunsets, cities shouldn't be entitled to all of that money. They should only get 75% of it. That's what the last iteration I saw of that legislation. I couldn't tell you what it was.
My understanding of it is different than his in that when it sunsets, that the value of that agency then comes onto to the taxing districts as their new, similar to new construction rolls. So it adds to the total valuation.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. How does that work? Because
It's
all-
important.
right, because all that fight that they've been having down there on that Senate bill was saying, it started out at 50% of the urban renewal money's coming back. It went up to 75. What is that? What does that look like?
So to the
Big money.
taxpayer, their tax bill doesn't look any different.
No, I
Yeah,
know. But
And
what
so
I'm
when the
saying is-
revenue comes to you, your revenue allocation is based on that 1,000, right? And the 500, between the 1,000 and the 1,500, that 500 is going to go to the agency, right?
Right.
So when the agency sunsets, then that 1,500 is going to be split amongst
So it adds to our taxable, or it adds to our levy dollar amount.
It's like new construction.
Right. It's like new construction rules. Okay. So, yeah, because when I look at this, when you get this new assessed value of $49 million, that's a huge increase. And is that,
because as the time goes, this is how what's the base revenue, right? Sorry, if I had my computer, I would do this a little differently, but if you look at this, so the city collected taxes on the 3.789 million for 15 years. That's all the city got, right? And that difference between the current assessed value of 49 million, those tax dollars went to the agency and they put in the $3.8 million worth of infrastructure improvements. And then the ripple effect is the new jobs, the average, the payroll, and then at the end of the day, the assessed value, 49 million, that assessed value is going to go into this,
So you
into
gotta-
the city's calculation.
so you got a net increase of $46 million basically in your taxable value,
Yeah,
but then
which will drop your levy rate.
At the same time, you're increasing your levy dollar amount based on those monies that would have over the $1,000 split, however, right? So, right, okay.
It'd be just like adding an annexation into your L2 form.
Right.
saying, hey, this is now annexed into the city. I mean, but again, in 15 years, those fun people down at the state house are gonna have changed things.
Sure they are, but for initial purposes though,
Yeah,
there's a couple benefits at the sunset for the city
yes.
Yes,
and its taxpayers as a
Yeah.
whole, right?
Correct.
because
Also could be a
theoretically,
detriment if it goes the other way.
But again, like she's saying, you know, the bond or whatever, the urban renewal can't turn around and borrow money that it doesn't have.
Yeah.
So
If it doesn't make money.
if it's not making money,
Yeah.
it's not gonna spend money. So,
It's an interesting, the whole urban renewal thing to me is an interesting concept as a
Yeah.
whole. And it's trying to understand and decipher this.
well, I
I
think
mean, if you,
that,
I look at it too, if we happen to be in a recession, the values of the properties are
Mhm.
going down. It'd be at that time, that dollar amount could be lower also, right? That from 1.5 maybe, or from $1,500 to $1,250, right? That could fluctuate up and down in there on the amount that's going to the urban renewal. It could be either $500. If the economy takes a crap, it could go down to $250.
right,
no, I think that there's a clause on there, and stop me if I'm wrong. I mean, watching McCall's,
yeah,
this is the rate, period. If there's anything above, then it comes in. But if it doesn't come in, it doesn't come in.
Okay,
yeah,
If it stays level,
okay.
yeah. And that's why the first couple of 2-3 years of the creation, there's not a lot of revenues coming in. And so you don't go out, it's about having contracts, land under contract and agreements in place in order to have that come. It's all part of it becomes part of your plan. And if you choose to go down this way, I would have an attorney answer those kinds of
And
questions.
Just think about it. I mean, I'm trying to think through the process of that Senate bill. What their thought process is, why do they think that impacts current taxpayers? You know what
Can I
mean?
turn
mean,
my
I'm not-
microphone off?
I understand the other side with new construction. Is it similar to new construction where it really truly won't impact new taxpayers, or is it really?
Mayor, the Senate is just trying to point tax problem and funding problems at the cities.
I know, but I get the new construction side of that because I don't understand the urban renewal at all because we've never dealt with it here, right? So I'm just trying to understand that a little bit.
Well, and it gives you something to think about, right? I wanted to present it to you. And as I said in the very beginning, if it piques your interest, then you get an expert in here who can answer all of those questions. I mean, as an economic developer, I go to a certain point and then I turn it over to an attorney, right? And so, but I didn't feel like, unless it doesn't sound appealing to you, there's no reason for you to pay to have an attorney come in right now and do it, right? So let me give you what information that I have. And then if it appeals to you and you want to go that way, then mayor and council can find an attorney. I have several names. I'm pretty sure Association of Idaho Cities can give names. So there's a lot of options out there.
Would it take a tax accountant to talk about the dollar amount? I mean, I don't know.
I don't think it's a tax accountant.
Would the attorney know this whole valuation,
I think
moving dollars?
you're probably gonna talk to the Idaho State Tax Commission
So maybe we need to
about
have a
urban,
workshop
and they
with them
probably
on
have
that.
an urban renewal.
I'm just trying to figure out next steps for us to educate ourselves on this. So we're clear, because I'm gonna tell you right now, if we're confused, anybody that's watching this is probably absolutely lost.
I would look at the plans that she says that are online.
Yeah,
Like, go ahead
And
and look at those.
then from there, say, hey, does any of this make sense for that area? I mean, because you really want it to be based on that area, right?
Are there any examples of any that have failed?
not that I know of that they failed. Have there been communities that have been upset as to where the money was spent? Yes.
Failure.
But as in, did they not accomplish their plans? I haven't heard of any.
Well, it's just, this is a lot to digest, and I
Yeah.
do appreciate your time. And my questions are, I don't even know what to ask quite yet. But my worry initially is I don't care if we call it a bond, a tax, or what, but, you know, there's only two ways a city or any entity that's nonprofit can get its money. And one is by passing some form of tax to get it, or two is by reducing that we're giving something else. For every dollar we have to either allocate somewhere or take from somewhere, because we can't make a profit. So we either increase the tax and bring it in, or shift out of one program and put this into another. So that's what I'm trying to get.
That's what, in my opinion, that's what this is doing, is shift, it's a shift.
Well, that means we wouldn't have to tax our folks in the beginning. So what can we shift it away
Well,
from?
it seems to me that this is all centered around properties up for redevelopment, and that the properties themselves are the base for the funding.
Yes.
And by declaring that we want to do something different with this property, it inherently increases its value. So you start to generate a little bit of revenue. And then you bring in some developers who do these kind of things and recognize that, hey, for a little bit of investment on my part, then I can turn around and make a bigger profit. So that depends on the people who own the property right now being willing to sell it and do something different with it, or finance something different with it currently.
Yeah, that's another thing I was thinking is, do we need to buy this property or just get MOU
Well,
with
so
landowners?
if that's
or-
the case, then there shouldn't be any new taxes that are initiated or put on the people in order to fund these things and make them successful.
It's just a
If
shift.
you get the landowner to agree and the developer.
It's all private. And what we're doing is we're creating kind of a quasi-public entity around it that's appointed by the city and controlled by the city, because we're recognizing that, well, it is.
Initially it is,
Yep.
because we're the ones that determine that.
You authorize the existence of the board, but let's take it, maybe I could equate it to,
I don't mean to confuse things by saying control. The city appoints, the city unappoints. So that's what I mean by
But
control.
we don't unappoint, the board unappoints. That's
Yes,
what,
but
that's
couldn't
what
we
you were saying
dissolve the
earlier.
board?
Okay, whatever the law says, the city's in control, we set it up. That's all I mean by control. Right, so I forgot what I was going on.
He'll come back to you, but we won't be here.
this last slide here is about thoughts, right? It doesn't do you any good to create an urban renewal district that it has land that's 100% already developed, because there's no increment of increase. Vacant land comes in at one price, one assessed value. When you put a building on it, it adds to the assessed value, right? If you have a decrepit barn and it gets torn down and you put in a new building, you have an increased assessed value. So it truly becomes a conversation is, are there opportunities for redevelopment? Are there opportunities that land is available? And it's part of the thought process. And will the plan, do you think it will increase the tax base? Ultimately, there's a couple of goals. You want to incentivize commercial development to increase the city's tax base. And you want to take some of the burden of development off of them by using the urban renewal dollars to do infrastructure, so that you can talk somebody or, convince somebody that they want to do a capital investment here. And so that you have to take that into account. It doesn't, I had one more thought, I can't remember. Okay, so increasing the city's tax base, you provide jobs if it's a commercial or light industrial uses. I'm sure you've heard the characterization before. Every tax dollar paid by residential, they use about $1. It used to be $1.67 in services. I'm not really sure where the number is now. But for a commercial user, every dollar of tax that they pay, they generally only use about 2/3 of that of service. So it helps you as a city to increase your commercial light industrial tax base. And that takes the burden of taxes, puts it, you can call it a tax shift if you want to, but it's the value of the land and the value of that building. It takes a little bit of that burden off of the residential because they use more services. Residential does, cost of services.
Well, we've all discussed wanting more commercial here. I don't think that's a secret. So,
Super Bowl commercials don't count, Councilman Hershey.
Super Bowl.
I think they do.
Okay, well, I guess we take this and if you have any more questions?
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate it.
Hang on, Michael, I've got a question.
So we briefly talked about local improvement districts and whatnot. Can you go into a little more detail and kind of compare and contrast some of the other funding mechanisms and, you know, how they differ from this? You know, I'm just trying to figure out what all the.
We could be here for another hour.
The toolbox could be.
You know what? I don't have that off the top of my head. I do have a printout. How about if I email to Mac? I have a couple of graphs that might explain it a little bit better. One is on the taxing dollars, where it shows how the increments increases and then what happens when the district closes and the money goes all back to the city. So I have that graphed, and then I have another graphic that talks about the difference between the LID and the CID and the urban renewal. And so I will email those and let Max send them out to you so it's all official. And then you'll have that easy for you.
Okay,
So,
we good? Thank you. Appreciate it. Did you have a thumb drive up here?
I
Or
do.
was that, you do?
I
Okay.
do.
We can shut it down now. We're done. We are adjourning for the night.
Oh, actually, I
I've already
did ask
said
a
we're done.
question earlier about city limits versus area of impact. Does this
Oh,
have to be in city
oh.
limits?
So I think that if the city is creating the urban renewal district, the land needs to be in the city. If you're using land in the county and it calls for an election, then it's the county that would vote on it. So if you're using county lands, if there was a need for that election for like municipal buildings, it's wider than that. You should have, if you have land in the urban renewal district that is not owned by the city, but privately owned outside of the city limits, you would need them to sign on to be included. They would have to agree to be included.
But it would likely increase the value of their property.
Yeah, absolutely. Because a developer looks at that and says, I can tell you, I've lost 2 projects to Sky Ranch. I'm just gonna put that out there because, well, the first thing is that Idaho Power put in a big substation and it didn't cost anybody anything, right? Idaho Power saw the need and all of the users in the Sky Ranch that needed it. And so, I mean, it's just things like that they took money. So the urban renewal district in Sky Ranch is getting ready to close, but they took some of the profits and they bought some additional acreage. I think it's 120 acres. And they're going to create a new urban renewal district for that, but it's across the street from the old one. So, yeah.
Good. Any more questions hidden in your packet?
Yeah.
I just had the one written down.
Okay.
Thank
All
you
right,
for.
we're done.
bringing
Thank
us.
you.